Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. Vladimir Putin has won the Russian vote, is about to embark on a second consecutive term as Russia's president. What lies ahead for Russia and the world now? I ask his official spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. Thanks a lot for being on our program. It's been a while, actually.
Yeah.
So I guess Putin has to win more often for us to talk to you. But we got a lot to talk about. Let's start with elections. Elections are over. President Putin got much more than anyone expected. He got more than in 2012.
It's a historical record, of our country.
Yeah, but, everyone thought he was going to win. Even the people who didn't like him were like, of course he's going to win. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But the bets were 60, 65%. But this, did you expect this result?
No. And himself, he said actually that it was quite unexpected for him. It was quite unexpected. And now, of course, as a president of a country, when you have this level of support, you feel the level of responsibility. Because every leader carries a burden of responsibility of this support.
I was in America recently, in Europe. What they're saying is that because there's so much pressure from the West towards Russia, that kind of helped consolidate Russia's public opinion and helped Putin gain this much votes. Would you agree with that?
Well, partly yes, of course. We can hardly ignore this effect of international pressure coming from outside, because this is Russia. It's an outstanding country with its own traditions, historical traditions, and historical mood of people. If they face any pressure coming from outside, they unite. They unite, and they unite around a strong leader. This happened numerous times during our history, and of course, partly it is happening now. Because when you see unprecedented pressure, when you see even craziness coming from some countries, you understand what I mean. People cannot tolerate it. They resist. And resisting, they unite around a strong leader.
The Russian constitution limits the president to 2 consecutive terms. Now, when Putin was asked about what he's going to do, he said, I'm not going to change the constitution yet. Yet being the key word.
Well, actually, he never said that.
He never said that?
Well, of course. You have to be very precise when you quote Putin.
What was his exact quote?
Otherwise, he will say that you are like myself.
Did you take that seriously? I mean, seriously, he said that...
No, he said the question was, have you ever thought and are you planning constitutional reform in this country? Constitutional reform.
Not yet.
And he said, not yet, but it's not about changing constitution, or it's constitutional reform is more complicated thing.
But he said not yet.
And you have to be precise in quoting that. So, he never did it before. He never did it in the year of 2008. And he was enjoying, again, overwhelming support of the people of this country. And presumably, should he wanted that in the year of 2008, he could have easily done that, to change the constitution and to adjust the constitution in accordance with his own political perspectives. He never did that. And we don't have any slightest reason not to believe him, not to trust him, not to think that he is not going to adjust constitution in accordance with his personal political will. The only thing that he's pursuing, the only goal, is a goal of ensuring a prosperity, rising prosperity of the people of this country, stability of this country, and economical breakthrough of this country.
Okay, so just to precise, when he meant no constitutional reform yet, he meant that maybe there will be constitutional reform, but it wouldn't be tied to his personal staying or not staying in power. Is that what you're saying?
Well, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
All right. I know that after elections, you're like, president, this term is going to be focusing on internal affairs, he's going to be focusing on everything that's going on in the economy. What would that mean for the foreign policy? Would that isolate Russia either further from the rest of the world?
No, to the contrary. To the contrary, Russia and President Putin is looking for repairing relationship where it is possible, and looking for developing and furthering relationship with the various countries, especially our partners in Europe, with the United States, and proceeding in these development as far as our partners are ready to. Well, the foreign policy, as far as I can interpret it, in Putin's understanding, the main purpose of foreign policy and international relations is to ensure a comfortable environment for implementing of domestic tasks. So he is quite understandable in his domestic tasks. He's got quite a clear plan of development and understanding of preliminary tasks, of secondary tasks, and so on and so forth. So what he needs a support from diplomacy to ensure a comfortable environment for them.
We got a lot of questions about whether there is a room for maneuvering between West and Russia and whether there is place for creative diplomacy. But first, I want to ask you about us and what we do and the consequences that what we do entails in the West. For instance, when the president was addressing the nation, he unveiled new weapons to the world and said that no one has this kind of weapons. These are the best, the fastest. And he said, now the world will listen. Do we need to show weapons in order for the world to listen to us? I mean, do we not have other means to get our message across?
Well, he's been trying to send his message across since the year of 2002 or 2003. I don't remember exactly right now. But when United States abandoned the Treaty of Anti-Missile Defense, that was a very, very serious threat for mutual nuclear deterrence. And this is a basic element of international stability and security. And since then, Russia found itself as a state being under siege of attempts of neutralizing its nuclear potential, its nuclear capabilities, thus endangering the existence of nuclear deterrence. The only way, and despite sending signals of unacceptance of this process, proposing various compromises, proposing cooperation in ensuring international stability, unfortunately, our country failed to meet reciprocity. And as a result, the only way was to show that in any case, despite all the efforts of our counterparts in this story, despite their continuous efforts to build the entire missile shield, Russia will be capable of ensuring a mutual deterrence system.
Do you feel like this is working? Showing that we have the best weapons in the world? Yes?
Definitely yes.
Can you elaborate?
Well, if you analyze the reaction coming from responsible members of international society, you will see that there is a certain understanding of necessity of urgent negotiations on international security and even disarmament.
Well, Trump just complained recently after a phone call to Moscow that this arms race is getting out of hand. Out of whose hands?
Well, we know that nuclear weapons are made not to be used. They are made to protect. And the main purpose of existence of nuclear weapons is not to be used ever. So they protect and they ensure stability and they ensure this balance. But we're not only two countries carrying nuclear weapons, nuclear potential. There are other countries, countries that are about to become nuclear powers, or countries who are endangering the world to become nuclear powers, countries that might have become already nuclear powers. We all know that. And all these can lead to change of balance, and that is extremely dangerous, and that needs cooperation between leading nuclear powers to ensure a process of non-proliferation, to cooperate in strategic stability.
But I think when he meant the arms race is getting out of hand, he really just meant Russia and the United States. And you know, I was asked this question when I was in America, and I thought it was kind of funny because there's such a discrepancy in Russia's military budget and America's military budget. I mean, there were like $700 billion budget with like 80 billion just bonus this year, and all of our budget is 80 billion.
And then it is going to be reduced.
Yeah, so how,
it's
I mean, how can anyone really talk about
GDP.
arms race seriously?
Well, of course, we cannot compare our military expenditures. So in 5 years we're going to spend less than 3% of GDP for military defense purposes and for arms production purposes. It cannot be compared with the expenditures of the United States. But I would like to remind you of the latest statements of President Putin. Russia is not going to be driven into an arms race. It does not correspond with President Putin's primarily goal of domestic economic development and domestic breakthrough in economy. So we all, and President Putin, we all do not need arms race, and it was confirmed and declared by President Putin, and this is the main declaration that we have to take into account.
All right, Mr. Peskov, we're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, we're going to continue talking to Dmitry Peskov, Russian president's press secretary. We're talking about everything, relations between Russia, the United States, and Europe. We're talking about the media wars and much more. Stay with us. And we're back with Dmitry Peskov, Russian president's press secretary. Mr. Peskov, when NBC's Megyn Kelly asked him about whether we're in a new Cold War or not, President Putin dismissed it as propaganda. He said, no, anyone who's saying that America and Russia are at the new Cold War, that's part of propaganda. But when you really look at the facts, right, I mean, there are troops on Russia's borders, and they're getting closer and closer. Russia is creating new weapons. There's the huge media war going on between the countries. Accusations flying back and forth, especially towards Russia with the poisoning and the meddling in the elections. What is it, then, if not a Cold War? What is it that, well, what's happening between America and Russia right now?
We're witnessing lots of elements of Cold War. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of elements of Cold War in our agenda, and we're facing it in international relationship. We face, well, let me say it's not all the countries are comfortable with rising Russia. With rising Russia with the leadership of President Putin.
But they should be used to it by now. It's been 18 years, no?
Well, the more Russia is rising, the more uncomfortable they feel, and the more tough they start to behave in international relations. And in this tough behavior, they are ready to jeopardize international law, the basics of international relations, free trade and commerce regime. They are ready to forget about fair trade. They're ready to forget about WTO rules. They're ready to forget about every rules when they want to suppress Russia.
But why?
And these famous words of craziness, we're going to make them pay the price. You know, it's like maniacs.
But why
should
Russia? Why Russia?
Yeah.
I mean, there's China. I mean, it's rising much faster and much more. It's incomparable. There's no comparison to Russia, how fast China is rising. I mean, India much less, but still, there's so many other countries that are rising. Whether we talk about human rights, what they accuse us of, I mean, incomparable what happens in Russia in those countries, right? Incomparable. But it's the Russia that's demonized. In terms of even rising, they're rising much faster than Russia. Why is it that the Russia is always the infernal enemy?
Well, I don't think I can explain it in a couple of words. It's a very complicated issue that needs a much more deeper analysis. I think it comes from history. If you see through history, Russia was treated as a rival, as an enemy, for lots of centuries. And then,
so it's just laziness and
there are some let's say, some remainings in attitude of Western countries towards Russia coming from that time. But it doesn't mean that all the countries in the West that they share this philosophy. Lots of countries in Europe, they understand that Russia is an untakeable part of Europe, and you cannot think about prosperous Europe and developing Europe if you don't see Russia being involved in all the European processes. That Russia's voice has to be taken into account, and so on and so forth. So it's we cannot say that this angry attitude is an overwhelming one. It is very serious, unfortunately, but there are some voices, let's say sober voices, coming from various regions of the world.
I think this angry voice is overwhelming if we talk about United States. I mean, I lived in a country for 10 years. I love the country, but I have never ever encountered and seen anything like that. This anti-Russian hysteria.
Well, you know the perfectness of the brainwashing system.
I want to talk to you about that because I feel like the main difference between the Cold War now, even though Putin doesn't like this as a term to describe what's going on now, and the Cold War then, the actual Cold War, is the media war. Because now we have the media on both sides. And to be fair, I think we should take fair share of the blame here. Because what you have is that everything is out in the open. Back then, there were rules of the game, like some boundaries that either side rarely crossed. Right now, with the media, putting it out everything there is, what presidents think or say, what journalists think or say, what a citizen, average citizen thinks or says, that really makes it and takes the animosity to a whole new level. It takes it to the people's level, which was never there before. I mean, Soviet Union and America, they were ideological enemies, but the people never hated each other. They hated each other's systems, right? Soviets